Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I am a priest of the Elite Church of Christ and a theology professor. This is a podcast on the StarQuest Production Network at sqpn.com. Today we're on day 216, recovering Apostolic Exercitatum 14, or working nationally and internationally, not just locally. At least that's what I put when I kind of skimmed through all the documents back in 2024. As I read this paragraph more in depth, now I realize it's more about politics more broadly, both locally and internationally. Just in case you're wondering why sometimes the summaries I put there on the reading plan, which I read at the beginning here and right at the end, don't quite match the summaries elsewhere, is that these summaries are the ones that I put on in 2024 when I briefly skimmed the whole thing, whereas the ones I have right after this are the ones that I did as I was writing today's script. If you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican or frmatthewlc.com/Vatican. So yesterday we spoke about the duty of lay people to imbue their work, family, social life, etc. with the gospel. Today we are going to talk about we're going to conclude chapter 3, and we're going to talk about the various fields of apostlate. We're going to talk about Catholics need to work for the common good in all areas of culture and society, including politics, charities, NGOs, etc., from local to international levels. So, paragraph 14 has 4 subparagraphs, which the first one is Catholics needs to work for the common good in politics at various levels. And B, we should work with all with goodwill in politics. We're working with other people who agree with us, even if they don't agree with us on everything. Increased solidarity, recently, that lay people should promote, and that's even more so today than it was in the 1960s. And then trade and aid should be fraternal, not imposing. So let's begin with 14a. A vast field for the apostolate is opened up on the national and international levels, where the laity especially assists with Christian wisdom. In loyalty to their country and in faithful fulfillment of their civil obligations, Catholics should feel themselves obliged to promote the true common good. Thus, they should make the weight of their opinion felt in order that the civil authority may act with justice and that legislation may conform to the moral precepts and the common good. Catholics skilled in public affairs and adequately enlightened in faith and Christian doctrine should not refuse to administer public affairs, since by doing this in a worthy manner, they can both further the common good and at the same time prepare the way of the gospel. Here we have to look at politics and other things like charities, NGOs, etc., and how they work, how they operate, both in the different levels, both local, state, national, international, things like that. And their goal is always towards the common good. Different charities and different NGOs are going to approach different aspects of the common good, whereas this government is more responsible for the common good in general, but this common good is the goal of them all. So what is the common good? I'm going to go a little bit to the definition of Father John Hardon, because I think his dictionary is a pretty good resource for Catholics at this kind of level if they are not sure about terms of their faith. It's not the most thorough academic thing, but it's very good for the kind of level this podcast is at. Let's read his definition. The benefit of the community is the welfare of the whole community as the proper object of just law and is distinguished from individual good, which looks only to the good of a single person. So this definition gives us this idea of the good of the community, the good of all. Now, it is the purpose of politics. Now, things that common good can be things that are indivisible or divisible, or things that only one person can have or multiple people can have. If we have a trustful society, nothing is lost to that trust if one more trustworthy person is added to it, and we all have the same trust in society. Now, a parking spot, for example, there's only one parking spot. Like, my car can't be in the same spot as your car. Maybe in some extra large spot or something that you could. Like, sometimes they have like bus or camper spots, you can both park there. But a normal parking spot, my car and your car both can't fit. So, for example, my local religious house here, we're at the seminary, and we have so many parking spots. And we have so many cars for the seminarians, for the priests, for the employees, things like that. We have spaces for guests, etc. So there's certain spots where I can park and certain spots where I can't. Now, these are the common good. It's good to have these parking spots for the whole community, but if I use it, then others can't. If someone comes to confession to me, then somebody else can't be confessing at the same time. But at the same time, if we show charity to each other, that is not diminished by showing charity to more people. So there's these two kinds of common goods, which are important to note because we need both of them in politics, society, things like that. We need a society that trusts, that has charity, but we also need physical things. Like people need food for dinner. And if you eat that food, I'm not eating that food. The only way that might happen is, if mom eats the food and then she breastfeeds it while the baby eats the same food. Yes, but that's a very special circumstance. And the mom has to eat more food because she's feeding a baby. So we're talking here about these various things within politics. Some people think, I voted for the party that's going to do the most for the common good, therefore I'm done. No, that's not what this says. This idea is that we're open to doing all these different things in society to help it out. We're doing all these things to help out with charities, NGOs, in politics, things like that. And Catholics should be open to work in public administration when it can benefit the common good. Obviously, you need someone who is skilled in that area. For example, I have a friend who runs the IT for a decent-sized university. And if, for example, there was a job opening to be like some kind of IT director at the state level or something like that, he has the skill set that reasonably he could do it, and he should be open to that as a Catholic. I don't. I started computer engineering before I did the seminary, but I really don't have the skills to run the IT department for the state of Connecticut or Maine or anything like that. I just don't. And so this is all dependent on the skill set you have, because different people have different skills. Let's move on to 14b, which is talking about we should work with all of goodwill in politics. So when it talks about goodwill, what the church is talking about, people who want the good, generally want things that are good, but are not fully in agreement with us on things like Jesus is the Son of God, every single detail of Catholic teaching. For example, there's a lot more who will oppose abortion than who will oppose contraception in the U.S. And if someone's goodwill opposing abortion, we shouldn't just say, we're not working with you because you don't oppose contraception. That's the kind of thing it's talking about. But let's read 14b here. Catholics should try to cooperate with all men and women of goodwill to promote whatever is true, whatever just, whatever holy, whatever lovable. Confer Philippians 4. They should hold discussions with them, excel them in prudence and courtesy, and initiate research on social and public practices, which should be improved in line with the spirit of the gospel. So we have a lot of examples of things like this. For example, if you follow the UN, you'll notice the Vatican is often kind of a coordinating force between some Catholic countries that are still solidly Catholic, some Muslim countries, and a few others who are going to oppose gender ideology or oppose abortion, imposition of abortion, things like that. And these are all working together with goodwill. When I go for the March for Life, there's Rehumanize International, there's Feminists for Life, who are not necessarily going to agree with Catholics at every single point. In fact, recently this year, Feminists for Life published some photos I took at the March for Life. They had an article on art at the March for Life, and I took signs of pictures actually at the Walk for Life in San Francisco this year that were included in the article. So they sent me a few copies. And I don't think the church is going to agree with everything an average feminist might say. There's certain things that don't really align with church teaching and things like that if you look at feminism in the U.S. in general, it's not going to say. But there are feminists who say, no, we should stop abortion, and we should agree with them on that and work with them on that. And at times, there's also been Catholics who work with atheists trying to defend workers' rights, because the church is very much for defending workers' rights when employers try to take too much profit out of them, do it unjustly. It's not to say that every single case we're going to defend workers even when it's just to criticize them. Certain things right now where it takes 5 years and this whole huge process to fire someone who's obviously doing something wrong in the job is the opposite extreme. The church doesn't defend that, but it does defend when employers try to exploit workers. And it says, don't just do this in abstract. Put this in practice, put it into actual cooperation, put it into discussion, put it into research, and things like that. Now let's move on to 14c. It's talking about increased solidarity, and this is a more recent thing in the 1960s, and lay people should promote this. So let's read it. C. Among the signs of the times, the irresistible increasing sense of the solidarity of all peoples is especially noteworthy. It is the function of the lay apostle assiduously to promote this awareness and to transform it into a sincere and genuine love of brotherhood. Furthermore, the laity should be aware of the international field and of the questions and solutions, doctrinal as well as practical, which arise in this field with special reference to developing nations. So in the 1960s, when this was written, there was more of this global connections. But today, the global connections are much more than they were in the 1960s. My mom went to college in the 1970s, and she talks about how being probably hour 45, 2-hour drive away from her parents, she could very rarely call because calls were so expensive. Today, I could drive from where my mom's house was to where her college was, talking to my sister on the other side of the country, and it would cost me basically nothing. And that's something that we can have that gets us connection to those at distance, but it also gets us connection to people in need, to solidarity. If I see a video that I know was taken yesterday of a starving person in a foreign country, I'm much more moved to solidarity. I'm much more moved to donate money to help them out than to read an article about it 6 months after the fact that this person may have died, this person may have gotten better, all those things by the time I hear it. And I know for myself, I get charity campaigns like this on social media regularly, both kind of general ones, big funds, and individual ones, like fund this specific Catholic school in this African country or in Sri Lanka or Malaysia or anywhere like that. And those really put that international solidarity, that international connection into our lives much more than the 1960s. So this is one of those things where the Council Fathers saw an initial sign, now we have so much more. So we see that. And we have an especial importance for lay people here. I'm a priest who's a little more active on social media. I can do some of this, but I know that lay people must do most of it. Those kind of connections, those kind of working in charity, it has to be done mainly by lay people. There's just so much to do that we can't just dedicate priests and religious doing all of that. And it's important to talk about how charity and solidarity must follow doctrine. We can't distribute condoms. We can't exploit the poor nations and things like that. We have Obianu Ekokoya, I'm probably butchered that, sorry, who wrote Target Africa, Ideal Neocolonialism in the 21st Century, on this idea of how many of the richer nations put in these kind of poison pills that promote an ideology and really corrupt African nations. One of the main things she's talked about is how they push abortion when their culture is very much anti-abortion. She was from Nigeria and works in the UK as a medical researcher. And so we need Catholic lay people in NGO boardrooms, in political organizations that are setting these up, so that this is not this ideological colonialism. So we aren't punishing these poor nations. So let's move on to the last subparagraph, 14D. Trade and aid should be fraternal, not imposing. Let's read it. D. All who work in or give help to foreign nations must remember that relations among peoples should be a genuine fraternal exchange, in which each party is at the same time a giver and a receiver. Travelers, whether their interest is international affairs, business, or leisure, should remember that they are itinerant heralds of the Christ wherever they go and should act accordingly. I actually wrote the last thing at the end of subparagraph C about Target Africa before I read this, but that really applies here. There's a lot pushing that agenda that it's not really an open exchange, a fraternal exchange. It's really kind of an imposition by the richer nations. And trade also needs to be fair. There can be tariffs, but it's reasonable that the tariffs are the same way. It needs to be honest. Things like patents, things like not stealing technologies and such like that. And when we travel, we are witnesses to Christ. We need to respect local customs because certain cultures have different customs about what they eat, about things like that. And we announce Christ by our witness as Christians. This concludes today. Thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. I do this podcast on a volunteer basis, and my local religious community relies on donations to help pay our bills. If you want to support my community, you can go to patreon.com/frmatthewlc. There's also a link to both this and a one-time donation on my own website, which is frmatthewlc.com. You can also donate to help StarQuest at sqpn.com/give. Tomorrow I'm going to continue the next paragraphs in Apostolicum Exercitatem, which is 15 to 16, on individual apostolate flows from the Christian life, that idea of apostolate flowing from our prayer. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. Go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X for more information on the podcast, such as playlists for individual documents and a reading plan.